Good morning, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk about talent recruitment and retention policies. Generally, today on this topic, we're going to cover what the employer's new offerings are, what we're seeing our clients offer to get employees into the hiring position. We're going to address briefly this notion of ghost postings, which some of you may have heard about. We're going to talk about non-competition agreements. That would be the retention part. How do you get people to stay? And then we're also going to cover, Rob Hammer is going to cover the Corporate Transparency Act. So getting started, one of the things we're seeing, and we're talking to a lot of our clients who are having trouble hiring and bringing people in. These are some of the hot topics that employees or potential employees have been asking for. They've been going towards jobs that are offering these types of arrangements. So obviously the big one since COVID is flexible work arrangements. And that comes in the concept of hours and environment. So everybody knows the work from home portion of it. A lot of people are wanting to work from home. A lot of employers have offered, at least on a part-time basis, days where employees can work from home, maybe 2 days a week or 1 day a week. An alternative that they've been doing is to give flexible hours. So maybe they're in the office from 10 to 2. This comes into play a lot when people have younger families and they have school drop off and pick up type situations. And if the employer can be flexible as to hours, that's another attractive piece that people the new employees are looking for. The second thing that's coming up most of the time is the professional development opportunities and the personal career growth plan. So one thing that employees are really looking for is they want to participate, they want to have a meaningful experience at the place of employment currently. And so they're really looking for the employer to invest in them and to see what they can do with their talents. Everybody's looking to improve. Everybody wants to contribute. So they're looking for employers who are offering professional development opportunities. And that can come in the form of many opportunities. But, education, training, training people in special areas that they didn't have expertise in before. Anything that gives them the idea that they're making a bigger contribution to the employer is something that these employees are looking for today. The third most popular topic that's coming up is company culture and values. I'm sure everybody's heard of DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's a big buzzword right now, or buzz phrase right now. And so a lot of companies are offering training on this. Our firm did a training, a multi-part training on what it is and what it means. And companies have also started putting together committees within the employer for diversity, equity, and inclusion, looking for more opportunities to participate in the community. And just having this on the radar is something that employees are looking, how much does the employer value us? How much does the employer value the diversity, equity, and inclusion topic? So that's something that employees are looking for. And then finally, relationships with coworkers. That's always been a hot issue for employees, having a friend at work. That's, there's been all kinds of, quizzes and surveys done on employees and what makes them stay. And a lot of times people think, compensation. And that's always an issue. Compensation is always on the forefront of everybody's mind. But compensation typically falls down in the 3 or 4 spot in the top 10 things that people want out of an employment situation. Having a friend at work always ranks up there in the top 3. So relationships with coworkers, and with everybody working remotely, it's really incumbent on the employer to find opportunities where coworkers can get together, at least on a social level, to re-engage and reaffirm that those relationships that they have at work. So how can employers implement these things? So one, look for ways to build flexibility into work schedules. I mentioned the worker with a young family at home with school-aged children. That might be something that you can consider doing, is working more flexible hours or days from home. That requires you to be suited for that in the technology area, right? You got to make sure that the employees have the technology and the access, and you've got the security to make that happen. But look for ways to build in the flexibility for the employees' schedules. Number two, you can survey your employees to understand what benefits are of value to them. That's one of the things. I mean, it's really all over the map today. And unless you talk to your employees, and it doesn't have to be a formal survey. It can be SurveyMonkey's one that a lot of employers use to survey employees. But it could also just be an informal survey. Talking to your employees and asking them what benefits are of value to them will help you craft the types of benefits that you have to retain the employees. So bringing them in is the advertisement, right? That's the LinkedIn or the posting on what you offer as a company. But it's also important to retain employees and understand what your current employees value as far as what you're offering. The third item you can do is invest in a range of opportunities for skill development, greater access to mentoring and coaching opportunities. So that's one of the big things that doesn't cost any money. Putting time aside for a supervisor to talk to an employee that they're supervising, and spend 20 minutes a week, 30 minutes a month, whatever the time frame is, to actually sit down and spend specific time to mentor or coach these individuals. Everybody wants to feel like they're appreciated, and by putting a mentoring program in place and actually utilizing that to engage the employees will make them feel valued and can also help keep your retention levels up. And then finally, have regular check-ins or stay interviews with employees. So, at some point along, you have reviews typically for employees. Instead of reviewing them or just making it a simple review, what a lot of our clients are doing is basically asking them why they like their job, what can be improved. It's almost like, what can the employer do for you today? So when you're doing these types of reviews, it can also be considered what they're calling stay interviews. So take that opportunity to engage the employee, get a feel for what they like about their job, what they're missing, and you'll get a real opportunity to see how those employees, what they need in order to stay. All right, ghost postings. So ghost postings was a term coined in 2013 by the Wall Street Journal. At that time, it referred to job notices posted so a company could hire internal candidates. So that's, some companies have a policy that they have to post. Governmental authorities sometimes have to post the job. But in 2013, they referred to ghost postings referred to, hey, we already have our person that we want to hire, but we just want to make sure, we have to comply with our requirements, and so we're going to post it. In 2020, Forbes reported that companies were posting jobs while the company had hiring freezes because of uncertainty caused by the pandemic. So in that situation, in 2020, that was the pandemic. That was early on. We didn't know what was going on. Employers didn't know who they needed and how many employees, whether they were going to be open, right? So they would keep the postings up even though they had hiring freezes on, because they weren't sure of the future. And employers said, look, when they were asked about why they had these postings, they would say, well, we're always open to new people, right? Or they wanted to give the impression that the company's growing. So really, we're just bringing this to your attention because there are some cautions that you should be aware of. One, it's a danger to your reputation and goodwill. If you constantly have a job posting up but never fill it, it might look bad to people. So your reputation of the company says, hey, when you really do need a posting and an employee to fill a role, they may not even apply to it because they've seen that posting up for the last 6 months and they don't believe that it's accurate. They think it's a ghost posting. Another danger is unintended discrimination. If somebody does put in an application, when you have the posting up but you don't need to fill it, and then 6 months later you get a new posting and you fill it with that person, there could be some potential of, hey, why didn't you hire the other person? And it can cause some discrepancies. So just beware of these ghost postings. Trying to get to the next screen. Perfect. All right. So one of the ways that you can work on retention of employees is when we talk about non-competition agreements. So what's the current landscape of this? So this is a hot topic right now, ever since President Biden came into office. In July of 2021, he signed an executive order and sent a letter to the FTC encouraging them to curtail the unfair use of non-compete clauses that may unfairly limit worker mobility. So that's just a recommendation. And as of yet, there hasn't been any statements that have come out on that. They're doing some investigation. But along those lines, in January of 22, Representative Manoogian introduced House Bill 6031, which would change the landscape of non-competition agreements in Michigan. Among some of the points in that House bill says employers must provide applicants with written notice of requirements for enforceable non-compete agreements. So that's applicants. So before they're even hired, you have to let them know in writing that if they're hired, that they have to sign a non-compete. You have to disclose the terms of the non-compete prior to the hire, and you have to post a copy of the Antitrust Reform Act at the work site. So there's a bunch of postings that are required as an employer. This would be an additional one. In addition to that, if this bill passes, there would be a prohibition on employers entering into non-compete agreements with employees considered to be low-wage employees. And I have the definition of what they're calling low-wage employees. So it's 138% of the federal poverty line dollar value. It's currently approximately $38,000. So anybody making less than that, you could not have them sign a non-compete. They could go and do whatever they wanted to. That would be illegal if the bill passes. And then if you're found to have violated any of these, there's a $5,000 fine for each applicant. Again, this is not law. This is what is proposed in the House. So a question I get a lot is, does Michigan enforce non-compete agreements? And the answer is yes. It's actually codified in the law. MCL 445.774A says you can have non-compete agreements. It also says what you have to do to have an enforceable non-compete agreement. So you can have an agreement so long as it protects the employer's reasonable competitive business interests. And it has to be reasonable as to duration, geographical area, and the type of employment or line of business. We're going to look at those individually here. So duration, how long can you have a non-compete period? So it cannot be indefinite. The typical time frame that we see, what the courts have deemed reasonable, is typically somewhere between 1 year and 2 years for employees. It's a different situation if you're selling your business. You can typically, the courts have enforced longer periods of time, between 5 and 10 years for businesses that are sold. It also has to do is it reasonable in relation to whether or not the company's being bought outright, or if it's a payment over time, et cetera. So it's a very fact-intensive situation, but it has to be reasonable, and courts have typically upheld a 1 to 2 year on employees. Regarding geographic area, where is the employee restricted from competing? So it has to be an area necessary to protect the employer from unfair competition. That's the premise of the geographic limitation. So it can't be anywhere. You can't stop somebody from working in a competitive area or for a competitive company throughout the entire US, for example. Typically, it's a mile radius around the employer's place of business. And the mile radius is determined by what type of business it is, right? So if you're a physician, typically, the physicians, patients of physicians are typically, you don't go more than 5 or 6 miles to go see your doctor typically, unless it's a specialist. So if it's just a general practitioner, a 5 to 10 mile radius around where your place of employment is would probably be reasonable. If you said 50 miles, that's probably not reasonable. So the geographic area has to be reasonable given the type of business it is. What line of business are you in? You may prohibit an employee from working in a specific subset of an industry doing the same type of work, but it's probably unreasonable to restrict an employee from working for a competitor in any capacity. So, for example, if you think of the larger employees who have different divisions, right? So if your employee is making widgets for you, and they go to a competitor who also makes widgets, but the employee isn't going to be making widgets, they're going to be working in some other area that the competitor has in a different division, that probably wouldn't be enforceable as a non-compete. You couldn't stop the employee from going to work from that other competitor because they wouldn't be doing the same type of work. But the takeaway here is that the more narrowly tailored that you have your non-compete, the more likely it is to be enforced. So, again, if you say, look, you can't make widgets in this area for 1 year after a termination of employment, that's probably going to be enforceable. Okay, the last test is the competitive business interest. What competitive business interest is being protected? So you have to, the point here is that you have to try to safeguard against any unfair advantage that the employee would have over the employer. So if you bring them in and they don't have any specialized training, and you give them that specialized training, you don't want to have them take that specialized training to a competitor of yours to compete against you. And so if that's what you're protecting, then you're protecting the non-enforcement of the enforcement of the non-competition agreement is probably going to be upheld. So specialized training, I mentioned, knowledge of existing customers, if you have a very specific customer base, pricing information, and of course, confidential information. All those are things that can be protected and that would be enforceable by using a non-compete agreement. Again, the more narrowly tailored it is, the more likely it is to be enforced. So non-competition agreements are alive and well in Michigan. We have clients that use them all the time. But again, as long as it's narrowly tailored, it's more likely to be enforced.